farmer was out driving his tractor one day when he rolled onto a stretch of gopher mounds. The earth crumbled beneath one tire and the tractor rolled over on its side. Luckily, the farmer escaped the situation with only a few bruises. He went home and told his wife. She breathed a sigh of relief and said, "Honey, the Lord sure was with you." The farmer surveyed his bruises and answered, "Well, if he was, he sure got a rough ride." Abraham and Sarah knew that God was with them. They were a fortunate couple who, after years of heartache, were living their last years in happiness. God had promised them a son, and in their old age he was born. They watched Isaac as he grew, knowing that he was a special child. After years of turmoil and trouble, Abraham and Sarah could now enjoy their retirement years, basking in the glow of a promise kept. One day, God called to Abraham. "Here I am," Abraham replied. God told Abraham, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and offer him as a burnt offering on one of those mountains that I shall show you later." Oh, no, please God, not that. Now God knew how much Abraham loved his son. What God had commanded Abraham to do was unthinkable. It was unbelievable. No sane parent would willingly harm his or her child. It was an outrageous request. Maybe Abraham should have his hearing checked. Maybe he didn't hear everything God told him. Isaac was the child of promise. Isaac was Abraham's link to the future. What about that promise that he would father a great nation? The whole request seemed so inconceivable, so outrageous, so unfair. How would he tell Sarah that he would offer their only son as a sacrifice? Notice that Abraham was willing to act in faith even when he did not understand. Now, the bottom line was that Abraham was a man of faith. Abraham asked no questions. He didn't try to reason or argue with God. He didn't try to strike a deal. He didn't even ask for an explanation or a reason. Abraham said nothing. In such a situation, you would think that at least the thought would enter Abraham's mind to run in the opposite direction. Abraham had taken matters into his own hands before. Why not do so now when his son's life was at stake? Why not run away from God now that his link to future generations was in question? Isn't that what you and I would have done? Wouldn't we? Wouldn't we run? God is not as real to you or me as he was to Abraham. For Abraham, deliberate disobedience was unthinkable, regardless of how absurd the request may have seemed. Without question or reservation, he set out for the mountains with his son Isaac and 2 servants. They would travel for 3 days until they arrived at the special mountain that God would guide them to. Abraham took his faith seriously. It was not something he took lightly. Many years ago, some missionaries were going into a remote corner of Africa to work with a primitive tribe. The missionaries were uncertain about how they would be received, so they decided to give the tribe a gift as a sign of goodwill. As they flew over the area, a bright, shiny new plow was parachuted down to the tribe. The plow would help the natives as they farmed. At least that's what the missionaries' intent was. They were unprepared for what they found a few days later when they arrived at the encampment. The natives had never seen a plow before. They hadn't a clue as to what this strange-looking instrument, which had dropped out of the sky, was used for. not knowing what to do with it. They had put the plow on a pedestal, and they were worshiping it. The plow was designed to help them farm. It was designed for use in the fields, not to be revered. It was designed to strike deep in the African soil. It was designed to help the people, to nourish the people, to make them healthier, to make their quality of life better. But the members of that primitive tribe didn't know that. So the plow became an ornament rather than a tool. Sometimes we do that with our faith. We make our faith an ornament instead of a tool to help us live our everyday lives. Abraham might not have understood what God was commanding him to do. But being a man of great faith, Abraham was prepared to do whatever God commanded. Fortunately, it was never God's intent for Abraham to sacrifice his son. We need to know that. Every once in a while, we hear about a tortured soul who ends not only his or her own life, but also the life of the innocent family members. It would be a tragic misunderstanding if anyone in this room took this story to mean that God would ever tell anybody to take the life of a child. You don't worship the God I worship if you could ever read that into the story. God never intended that Abraham should harm this child in any way. I suspect that deep in his heart, Abraham knew that. Perhaps that is why he told his servant, "Stay here with the donkey. The boy and I will go over there. We will come back to you." In silence, father and son walked the final steps to the mountain. As they approached their destination, Isaac asked his father, "The fire and the wood are here, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering?" Abraham replied, "God himself will provide the lamb for a burnt offering, my son." There was no other conversation as they slowly made their way up the mountain. A troubled father, a trusting son, making their way into that dim unknown. That's what faith is all about, isn't it? Maxie Dunham's brother-in-law died in October of 1991 after a courageous battle with cancer. Randy Morris was 43 years old when he died. Before his death, he wrote Maxie a letter telling about his faith. In it, he described how he always prepared for prayer by going through what he called a relaxation phase. Now, he stated, "After a few moments, I travel in my mind to a place in the North Georgia mountains where I used to go on camping trips. There I have built an open structure, a gazebo, where I go to talk with Jesus. Normally I go in and call for Jesus, and he comes. We visit, and usually I give him my prayers of thanksgiving and intercessions." Late one summer, Randy got the news that his cancer was back. He was, in his own words, an emotional wreck. And at that time, Randy prayed. In his mind, he was again in the mountains, waiting for Jesus to come to the door of that gazebo. At that moment, a completely unthought of event happened that shook me to tears, Randy wrote. He saw himself as a 5-year-old boy. "I became like a camera recording the event," was the way he described the experience. In the person of this boy, he ran up to Jesus and hugged him. He pictured Jesus picking him up and carrying him to a seat and holding him in his arms. "He hugged me," Randy wrote. "I didn't say anything. He knew I was frightened. There were no answers, and the future seemed so dim. As he hugged me, he said, 'Trust me. Trust me.'" Jesus held me for a long time that night, Randy wrote, until he knew I understood what he meant. Randy found strength from this experience. We must trust Jesus as a child trusts. Totally, he wrote. Then Randy concluded his letter with these words. Because of this, whatever turns out to be the ultimate result of this disease, it's not the burden it was before. Jesus made no promise, nor did he reveal the future, but he had provided the format for living out the rest of my life with just 2 words. Trust me. Abraham didn't understand why God commanded him to sacrifice his son. But Abraham was a man of faith who placed his trust in God. We also can place our trust in God. When they came to the place that God had shown him, Abraham built an altar there, and he laid the wood in order. Then he bound Isaac and placed him on the altar. Abraham, with tears in his eyes, stood over his son with a hot coal in one hand, ready to start a fire, and a knife in the other. At that moment, when Abraham was ready to kill his son, an angel of the Lord called out to him, Abraham, Abraham. For the 3rd time, Abraham answered, Here I am. The angel told him, Do not lay your hand on the boy, or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. What relief. God had tested Abraham, and Abraham passed the test with flying colors. At that moment of great relief, Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in the bush. The ram was sacrificed instead of Isaac. Father and son worshipped God on the mountain. Abraham named the place, The Lord Will Provide, because he now knew the truth. God did provide and would continue to provide. Abraham placed his trust in God in a way he never had before. Abraham knew he could depend on God no matter what happened. Now that's the kind of faith you and I need. With such a faith, we can live our lives in confidence. In 1958, America's first commercial jet or air service began with a flight of Boeing 707. A month after that first flight, a traveler on a piston-engine, propeller-driven DC-6 airliner struck up a conversation with a fellow passenger. The passenger happened to be a Boeing engineer. The traveler asked the engineer about the new jet aircraft, and the engineer was wildly enthusiastic about this new, improved way to travel. He began speaking at length about the extensive testing that Boeing had done on the jet engine before bringing it into commercial service. He recounted Boeing's experience with engines from the B-17 to the B-52. And when his traveling companion asked him if he had yet flown on the new 707 jet airliner, the engineer replied, I think I'll wait until it's been in service a while. Even enthusiastic talking about our faith doesn't mean much if we aren't also willing to put our lives where our mouth is. The question for the day is, how much do you trust God? Abraham learned that behind the clouds of uncertainty, God awaits. He placed his total trust in God, and his trust was not misplaced. My guess is that Abraham was a different person when he descended from the mountain. From that moment on, Abraham realized that God would take care of his son Isaac. From that moment on, he realized God would provide whatever was necessary for the fulfillment of his promises. The church is called to offer the world a cup of cold water to douse the flames of hell with the waters of eternity. Have you ever been to hell? William Booth discovered hell one night when he couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, and he decided to get up and go for a walk. He journeyed into a part of London he had never walked through the poor section. He spent the rest of the night seeing sights and smelling odors he had never before experienced. And when he arrived home in the early hours of the morning, his wife, Catherine, was almost frantic. "Where in the world have you been?" she cried out. He replied, "Catherine, I've been to hell. I've been to hell." He then told her what he'd seen, and together they founded the Salvation Army. Have you been to hell? Been to hell and back is an old expression. Is there anyone here who has not been to hell and back in his or her personal life? All of you have. I'm asking if you've ever been to another kind of hell. A social hell, an economic hell, a demographic hell. You say you've never been to hell. I say, then why not? Why haven't you been to hell? We aren't called to live in hell. We are called to live in heaven. But as Dante found out, you can't get to heaven without going through hell first. The world is on fire. A world torn by hatred and strife. A world unredeemed. A world that is God's worst nightmare. A world to which God can no longer speak these words. And God saw that it was good. For the first time in a long time, Protestants and Catholics are talking rather than killing each other in Ireland. Muslims and Jews are talking to each other rather than killing each other in the Middle East. But Sunnites and Shiites are killing each other in the Persian Gulf. Christians and Muslims are killing each other in Armenia. Serbs and Croatians may still be killing each other in Central Europe. The actual number of wars, that's armed conflicts that kill at least 1,000, has increased steadily in our world since World War II. But the fighting is less between nations than between ethnic and religious groups in civil wars, internal collapses, etc. There were 30 civil wars taking place throughout the world in 1995. What do we do about the mess we are making of God's creation? Why is the church so late on hate? How do we work with God to fight against evil? To make our world such that God can once again say, as God said when the world was created, and God saw that it was good. When Jesus wanted to ask his disciples, "Who do people say that I am? And who do you say that I am?" he took them to a place called Caesarea Philippi, the capital city for Herod Philip and Gaulonitis. Caesarea Philippi was famous in Jesus' day for a couple of things. First, it was celebrated for its natural beauty, since the Jordan River begins there. Second, here was built the sanctuary to the god Pan, the god of nature. Third, a cave known as the Cave of Pan, or the Gates of Hades, was here. Here's what Josephus says about the Cave of Pan. Hard by the foundations of Jordan, there is a top of a mountain that is raised to an immense height, and at its side, beneath or at its bottom, a dark cave opens, within which is a horrible precipice that descends abruptly to a vast depth. It contains a mighty quantity of water, which is immovable. And when anybody lets down anything to measure the depth of the earth beneath the water, no length of cord is sufficient to reach it. Archaeologist and Dean of the Jerusalem Center for Biblical Studies, Charles R. Page III, reveals that this cave was known colloquially as the entrance to the underworld, or the gates of Hades. In other words, Jesus took his disciples to the gates of hell to ask them if they really understood who he was. He had his disciples stand in front of the gates to the underworld, in midst of the pagan headquarters for the worship of Pan, to found his church. Now, this is also the first time we see the word ecclesia is used in the Gospels. He uses the place to give them the keys to the kingdom. Right. One of the greatest athletes of the 19th century, cricketer C.T. Studd, decided to give up his athletic career and his inherited fortune to spend his life on the mission field. Now, to his friends and his family, who could not understand why he gave up the world for a life on the mission fields of India, China, and Africa, he wrote this little piece. Some wish to live within the sound of church or chapel bell. I want to run a rescue shop within a yard of hell. Jesus takes us like he finds us. Jesus does not leave us like he finds us. However, Jesus finds us hell raisers. He turns us into hell busters, people who will not let the world get away with abuse and denial of respect to all peoples. Are you ready to go hell busting for God? How do you know when you are in fact hell busting for God? Hell busters exude the Spirit. They give off a Christ-like spirit. When you're in their presence, you can almost smell holiness. But the holiest of holy smoke has a tinge of burnt smell with it. It's a smoky, holy smoke, not a sticky, sweet, holy smoke. It's a smell that tells you it's been slightly singed near the fires of burning flesh and souls on fire. Where are you getting singed? Where are you suffering for righteousness' sake? The Bible says, therefore let those also who suffer according to the will of God entrust their souls to a faithful Creator in doing what is right. If you live as a Christian, you will suffer. When you live with integrity, know this, you will suffer. When you live for honesty, know this, you will suffer. And when you live for justice, know this, you will suffer. So I ask you today, what pain pierces your life right now because you bear the name Christian? Because you dare to be a hellbuster? I never thought I'd ever end a sermon this way. Go to hell. If you prefer a different ending, try this. Too often the church is content to go fishing in bathtubs instead of embarking out upon the high seas. Bathtub fishing may be fun and easy and safe, but it's certainly not where the fish are. Consider this moving fish story of one well-singed hellbuster. Upon arriving at his new church appointment, St. Mark's United Methodist Church in downtown Atlanta, Dr. Michael Cordell discovered he had inherited a struggling inner-city congregation with an attendance rate of right around 100. A few Sundays after arriving, the Cordell family stepped outside the church right after service and was stunned to see a steady stream of exuberant marchers parading down their street. This was Atlanta's Pride Parade, which draws its ever-growing number of participants, primarily from the gay and lesbian community. As they watched the people streaming by, it struck Cordell that these were some of the people of St. Mark's neighborhood. This was part of the parish. A year later, when the Pride Parade participants reached the front of St. Mark's Church, they were met with an unexpected surprise. On that hot and steamy June afternoon, the church had set up a small oasis offering cups of cold water to all the marchers who felt hot and thirsty and tired. In no time, the water was gratefully guzzled down, and St. Mark's UMC had transformed its image in the face of that neighborhood. What a difference from the other nearby church that bordered the parade route. That church sent out its message loud and clear as it erected barricades, strung up temporary fencing, hired mounted policemen to ride their perimeters, and posted no trespassing signs across the church. The cups of cold water St. Mark's offered on Parade Day have brought all sorts of thirsty neighbors inside the doors of the church once more. Membership has climbed to over 400 in the last 2 years, and the neighborhood feels like it has a spiritual presence in its midst once again. Amen.
Amen.